All right, welcome back to another episode of the Digital Health Podcast. We have an amazing episode today. If this is your first episode, my name is Anthony Virgo. I am based in New York and I spent the last 7 years at a health tech startup. And now I am one of the hosts of the Digital Health Podcast along with my co-host and partner, Kazar. Kazar, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Shahid and I've been working in the healthcare domain for quite a while. I started with the dental practices and then we collaborated together and then we started working with a lot of other healthcare professionals. We are working with dental practices, psychotherapists, psychologists, and a lot of other healthcare professionals. Now I want to kick it over to Kat.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kat. I'm a grief therapist, and I started in healthcare actually about 10 years ago, which was a huge surprise to me. It was not what I had intended. But I started my work in adult palliative care. I did my palliative care fellowship at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. After that, I started the pediatric palliative care service at the Columbia at the Children's Hospital. So that was a really amazing experience. So I worked a lot there. I did a lot of volunteering prior to going to school for this sort of end of life grief, death work in hospices. And now I'm a grief therapist in private practice. And I'm currently in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I'm licensed in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, New Mexico, South Carolina, and Florida.
Hey, nice to have you, Kat. First and foremost, thank you for your time here and just being open for being on the podcast. Even some of the health systems that you mentioned in the Bronx and things like that overlap because I work with a bunch of those folks as well. You did go into pretty much your background and how you actually got started, but I always like to ask people in terms of like what was the spark that actually got them into the healthcare industry. So backing up even before that, like how did you even get into volunteering and everything like that to even spark your interest? We've been hearing almost a theme for the most part. Some people like myself fell into healthcare by accident, and then some people just knew that this is what they wanted to do. So just want to understand what was your journey like.
Sure. So my journey was absolutely unexpected for me. I was a professional dancer for 17 years, which was why I was based in New York City. And when I was getting ready to retire, because my body was like, please stop doing this, I actually went to a program in Times Square. It's called Career Transitions for Dancers. It's run by the Actors and Dancers Union, Actors Equity. And they do a lot of like personality testing. And they said I should be a physical therapist or a psychotherapist. And I thought, I do not want to be a psychotherapist. I think I would take too much of that home with me. I'm too sensitive, but I'd really like to help people. So I thought, okay, PTOT would be a great way. I did all my prereqs and I'd actually applied and waiting to go to school for OT. Applied early decision, so I got in December, but you don't start till September. So in the interim, I was working at a Trader Joe's in Danbury, Connecticut, and I was stocking fish in the freezer. And one day my boss was like, hey, at the end of the day, do you mind taking the flowers over? They're opening up this new hospice facility down the street. And if you want, you can take a tour on the clock. So I really didn't want I didn't know anything about hospice. And my idea of hospice, like in my head, I imagined like old people moaning and the smell of urine. And I thought, oh, no, thanks. But I really didn't want to stock any more fish. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll totally take a tour. So I took the flowers to the hospice, and the person giving a tour was a social worker who worked both in the bereavement center and with families in the hospice, and a few family members who had used this hospice for their loved one. And for me, I would say I'm not a religious person, I'm more spiritual, but I had like a spiritual calling moment. And I just knew it was for me. I signed up on the spot to be a family support volunteer and just completely dove in. So I started volunteering at that hospice in Danbury, which is Regional Hospice of Connecticut, which is an incredible, incredible facility. And I absolutely loved the work. And from there, I ended up attending Fordham University that has a program, a track specifically for palliative care and hospice. So I did that. And now that's the program that I teach in as well.
Amazing, amazing. It just sounds like, the roads were turning in that direction for you almost for the most part.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I'm curious to know. I know you're now a grief counselor, but I think the dance background is really unique in terms of actually getting into health and then like physical therapy and then palliative care. What have you seen in terms of I guess I would ask how important is it in terms of moving your body in health from your transition from being a dancer into healthcare? Are there some things that you've learned dancing that might have overlapped into the healthcare and then vice versa that you could say, hey, I could have used this at dancing if I knew this a lot earlier or sooner or what or if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I really think dance helped me immensely just because it gave me such a sort of a kinesthetic knowledge, like a felt knowledge of my body. And I knew that very, very well, which helped me, I think, in my practice to be a lot more observant of other people's bodies because the mind body connection is very real. And when we're dealing with illness, when we're dealing with stress, when we're dealing with chronic pain, any of those things, it really is a full system issue. So I think in terms of practicing psychotherapy, I would be remiss to not include a somatic component. I think it's so important to include that because everything is very much connected. And certainly in grief, grieving is a whole body experience, right?
Yeah.
It changes the brain, it changes how you are physically, it definitely affects how you think, the way you behave, all of those things. So I do think having a dance background has made me more aware of that connection, which I think in turn just makes me more useful to my clients because I have a more comprehensive, sort of holistic approach as a dancer.
1000%. I'm sure you're able to see things that the average, a person wouldn't be able to see because of that background 1000%. And then I love what you said about, it being a whole system or just health in general, it being a whole system. A lot of what we talk about on this podcast is the different layers of somewhere health, whether it's physical, mental, dentistry, any type of health is important, and it is a system, is all connected in some way, shape, or form. Because I always say if one of them starts to decrease or decline in any form, you're gonna feel it in other ways. I guess I want to ask a little bit about what you're doing for people who might be grieving. What is maybe like one strong or not even strong, what is a misconception that, the average person might not know about, grief, or, maybe there's someone out there that might not have had an experience to where they had to grieve, or, maybe don't know how to support someone who is grieving. What is a misconception that the average person might not understand about it, you think?
There are so many, and I'm so excited because I am an absolute nerd for grief. I love this work, and I'm a big part of what I love is just providing a lot of grief literacy because we hate talking about death, right? And it's one of the only things like death and taxes, right? That we're all going to experience, but it's something that we don't talk about with each other and we don't have the language, I think. So that's one issue is actually finding the words to be able to talk about grief.
Right.
But another thing is that people are very familiar with the Kubler-Ross model, right? And the 5 stages of grief. Well, that's an older model. And it was actually all of her research and her work was based on people who are dying, which is preparatory grief, as opposed to people who are going to be bereaved, which is it's an anticipatory grief. So they're actually very different. So I think people would be surprised that we no longer think that the goal is to move on from grief. We also think grief doesn't go through these 5 stages. Grief is sort of cyclical. People talk about waves of grief, which I think is very real. And those
Right.
don't end. You move stage to stage, but they are constantly going back and forth. And sort of my thing is when you grieve, it's like somebody hands you a bag of rocks. This is what I tell my students, a bag of dirty, jagged rocks. And as soon as you get them, you now have to carry them for the rest of your life. They're yours. And the task is like, okay, when you first get them, they cut your hands up, they get your clothes all dirty, your body starts hurting because you're trying to carry these heavy rocks. Then you realize, okay, I can wash them. They'll stop getting me dirty. If I polish them, they won't cut my hands. If I put them in a backpack, I can kind of balance the weight. So the work of grief is learning how to live with it and take it forward with you instead of getting over it.
Right.
And to that end, there's a concept called continuing bonds that I just love, which is the idea that there's a quote in a book called Tuesdays with Morrie that is death ends a life, not a relationship. And continuing bonds is about that idea
Right.
where just because the person you love is physically gone from this earth, it doesn't mean that you're no longer in relationship to them. So practically that looks like, maybe talking to them when people say like, I just wish I could talk to my mom one more time. I want to know what she would say about X. And my response would be, I bet you know. If you listen, if you
Right.
take a couple breaths and you listen, I bet you can hear your loved one's voice and you can know what they would say because you know them so well and they live in you now.
Right.
So that's one way. But there's a lot of way to maintain a continuing bond. You can wear their jewelry or their clothing or have a picture of them up that you pass all the time or anything like that helps you stay connected to that relationship. So I think people would be surprised about that. But there are two other grief concepts that I think are so important for people to know.
Okay.
One is called disenfranchised grief. This is about grief that's not really recognized by society. It's a concept by a guy named Dr. Ken Doka. He's incredible. He's from the College of New Rochelle. And it's the idea that we deem as a society some griefs more valid than others. So if someone passes from, let's say, cancer, that's a grief that is worth support, that is worth the casseroles and the showing up and the check-in calls.
Right.
But if somebody dies from, let's say, a substance use disorder, from an overdose, that's a disenfranchised grief. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of confusion. People don't even know what to say. So a lot of times they say nothing, and that leaves the griever more isolated. And that's true of a lot of different losses, like an ex-partner, an ex-spouse who dies. Well, you're not sitting in the front at the funeral. Can you even go? You shared a life with them, and there's a lot of grief there. So that's one that I think is really important. The other one is by a woman named Pauline Boss. It's called ambiguous loss. And this happens in a couple different cases. It's when somebody is psychologically present, but physically absent. That would be like if someone's incarcerated or missing in action, kidnappings,
Right.
or if somebody's physically present but psychologically absent, like
Right.
a dementia, an Alzheimer's, or perhaps on a substance where they're not themselves. And that's an incredibly painful type of grief because they're in front of you in some cases, but they're not them. And that connection is missing, or they're so emotionally present for you, but they're incarcerated and you
Right.
don't know when you'll get to see them again. You don't know when you can resume that relationship. So I think it's very important for people to know these types of grief to make them feel less alone, to know they're not nuts. And even these unusual grief circumstances, you're allowed to grieve. And grieving is a full body experience and it's going to affect you.
Definitely, definitely, Kat. Thank you so much for even breaking down the different, sides of it because I had no idea there were different ways or different types or categories of this type of stuff. I guess we already know that in health there's certain things that are already like a stigma or taboo, such as mental health or even grieving. How do you, I guess, in the work that you're doing and also outside? How do you or how would someone say someone who is grieving who's never really been open to it because they've never experienced it, how do they kind of seek help, or where is the resources that they go to? How I guess how do you actually make send the word out there or send the kite that hey, there's resources for this stuff, and it's okay to seek resources and help when you're going through it?
Absolutely. There are tons of websites that are available that have a lot of information. But one thing I would tell people is to start with your local hospice. Almost all hospices have a list of resources on their website, or if you're not comfortable with the internet, calling them and asking them. And they usually have a lot of grief resources, and almost all hospices provide grief support for the community, even if your loved one didn't die in that hospice. And a lot of hospices have bereavement support facilities or separate programs that offer one-on-one counseling, bereavement groups for specific types of losses, like losing a spouse or losing a child, losing a
Right.
sibling. And those are free for the community and they're just about everywhere. So my first thought would be doing that. If you're looking for support for children experiencing a loss, a really great resource is the Dewey Center. It's spelled like Dougie, but they have an incredible amount of resources online. For parents who've lost a child, Compassionate Friends is is another great online resource. And personally, I really love a website called What's Your Grief. So, starting in any of those places, there are tons of free resources that people can find that can lead them to other supports within their communities.
Kat,
Amazing,
before your
amazing.
explanation of grief, we just know the one word grief. We didn't know
Right.
that it has types, that it has categories. So today, after listening to you, we come to know that there is lot of stuff about grief that we need to understand.
Well, the other thing is a lot of people will come to me for grief counseling when they lose an important person in their life and they say, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to grieve. I've never done this before. And my response to that is, yes, you have. And the reason is there are so many grief producing events in life. If you're breathing, you're grieving. I mean, moving is a grief event, even when it's a good thing. And that's the thing people have trouble with is like if you get a promotion and you have to move, well, you lose everything you had at the old job. You were clearly good at it because you got a promotion. So you lose that piece of your work family. And then you lose the comfort of knowing what your day looked like every day. And then you move to a new city, even though it's something you're looking forward to, that's grief. You lose the community that you had. So big transitions are grief as well, like getting married, having a baby. These are things that most people feel should be joyful, and they are. But they also contain elements of loss of identity, sense of self, loss of family structure, reorganizing roles in a family. And all of that causes grief. Retirement, empty nest, all having a breakup. Breakups cause incredible grief and we don't give them their due, because we just think, oh, well, it's just a heartbreak. That's grief. That's a big loss. You lost who you were with that person. You lost that coupledom. You lost all of the hopes and dreams you had in that relationship for your future. Then those are gone. And those are grievable events.
Amazing, amazing, and I love the fact that you also brought up uh, the resources that people can actually check out as well, because it sounds like there's a lot up there. I mean, I think even on my side, I even used to like suggest things. A lot of people who are going through things to just reach out to the insurance company, but not even now that I'm thinking, wow, you could just go to maybe the local, hospice or
Yes.
health center that might actually already have things in the community that's something more familiar where you can actually leverage. I hadn't even thought about that, you know what I mean? So that's just even impactful to know on a day to day or just like future references. Even in my work, I had never even thought or even heard of anybody even saying, hey, maybe you should just go to your local hospice for support, whether you had a family member or anybody past there, they still are able to support you in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's the sense of health that people need, or the sense of community when it comes to health, right?
Yes.
Sometimes, a lot of these things make people socially isolated or they don't want to talk about these things, but it's okay to let people know the resources, but it's also okay to encourage them to speak out because it is a confusing time. A lot of what we talk about on the podcast as well is technology and how it's also shaping the healthcare system in so many ways. I can even think of a way where when I first started, even at my startup, telehealth wasn't even a big concept of like talking to a provider on a computer was like so far fetched. Even in my mind, I'm like, how is that even gonna work? This is gonna be impossible. To now today it's almost standard or more comfortable. We are seeing even patients be more open with the technology. I guess right now in today's day and age, how has technology might have affected the work that you're doing, or are you seeing any trends that might be impacting patients or your day to day on the clinical provider side, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I'm not sure I'm the very best for this question, but technology has impacted me personally in such an important and valuable way because my practice is entirely telehealth. And because I'm licensed in 8 states, then I get to work with people from all over and they can tune in when they need to. A lot of my practice is healthcare workers. I take care of a lot of professional grief, a lot of doctors and nurses who have losses in their job, moral distress, but also losses in their personal lives. And their schedules can be a lot. So one of the things that's great about telehealth is I'm in New Mexico, but I can work with somebody in New York after their shift. So I can be treating them at 9 p.m. in New York City time at 7 for me. But I also treat some people at 6 o'clock in the morning because that's when they're available. That's the time that they have. So I think technology makes it much easier to fit the things we need to take care of ourselves, like therapy, into our lives. But also, it helps me make sure I can take care of my family the way I need to and still run my business. So in that way, technology has been a huge, huge gift and a game changer.
Definitely, definitely. And it supports you in showing up as your best self, right? Just making sure
Absolutely.
that, you're able to be flexible. And the byproduct of that is you're being able to do your best work and being super present with whoever's coming for your services. Like that's a great example of how technology is shaping and being able to support the work that we all do in healthcare. What about any AI tools or any AI stuff that might be coming down the pipeline? Have you heard of anything on your end that might be disrupting things, or clinicians or anybody might be like, I'm a little wary about this.
I'd be one of those. I'm just a little wary about AI because of HIPAA, and I want to make sure I'm protecting my clients' privacy. And I just don't know how AIs are trained. Like there are options in some of our electronic health records to have AI transcribed during a session. It's not something I personally use. I just don't know enough about it yet, but it is something that is becoming more and more prevalent within our industry. Besides that, I know there are also AI assistants that help different private practices with scheduling. That's something I would certainly be amenable to. I've looked into it a little bit. I have a colleague who uses it. Um, but I know also a lot of people reach out to AI like Chat GPT or Claude when
Right.
they're struggling with mental health. And I've seen mixed reviews on that. I
Right.
think for some people, it can be incredibly helpful. And for some people, it sounds from the article I read, I believe it was in the New York Times, that it's dangerous for mental health. So for me, I would still be wary of using those tools, but I am glad for the people that they're helpful for. I think maybe the best way in the initial phases of using AI to assist with mental health would be as a scheduler, maybe as a transcriber, if there's a way to ensure that it is maintains HIPAA compliance and that my client's privacy is always protected, because that's like the number one thing for me, I think.
Right.
But I think if someone is using AI on a day-to-day basis for mental health issues, but also working with a therapist, I think perhaps that partnership could be really beneficial, but I just don't know what the research says yet.
Yeah, 1000%. And I think that's another scary thing about technology and how it comes into healthcare and how it's being introduced. There's a lot of things and a lot of questions that is just not out there for the public or anybody. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of new tools and technology that kind of just comes down the pipeline, and it's just like, what are we supposed to do with this thing, or how safe is it to use? I think that's what we find with a lot of partners that we work with, and we build from a place when we're going into the AI part of it is we build from a place or support clinical practices in a place not replacing human beings at all. That's like the complete opposite. The good thing about Kazar and myself is we come from like the healthcare industry background, so we know the most important thing when we're building an AI agent is, wow, we have to make it HIPAA compliant. Versus if we didn't have that background, then you'll just be having an engineer or someone kind of come in and it's just like, hey, this is this cool thing, and don't even really have the knowledge of how important it needs to be HIPAA compliant at the end of the day. Just for anything to run in healthcare, everything has to be HIPAA compliant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we often tell people like, when people are using AI, again, you always want to use your best judgment as you can, but also seek a professional that's within the specific lane or niche that you're getting advice in. Because it's like I could talk about AI in healthcare all day long, but I can't talk about AI in hospitality or restaurants and stuff like that because it just isn't my expertise to even know how AI would even work in a system like that, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so I think that's interesting to know. Um, we also have usually when we are on the podcast or just talking to a lot of people in this space, we sense a trend that some people are either on the side where they're like, "Hey, I'm not for AI. I don't like it. I really don't think it's really beneficial right now. It's gonna change everything." And then some people are like forward thinking, innovators, and like, you know what? I use this on a day to day. It's what I'm used to, and I like it. And then we also have people in the middle that's like, half and half. So I'm I'm assuming you might be in the middle a little bit, half and half. You see the benefits, but also you are mindful about those little nuances that the average person might not think about, such as HIPAA, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I know AI is going to change everything. And I hope it's in line with what you were saying, that it's sort of AI in conjunction with humans to make, in my case, psychotherapy even better. I would love to see that. But I also need to see a lot more data for, I think, for me, myself, to be comfortable using it more broadly in my practice.
One thousand
And
percent, 1000.
by the way, Kate, what's the one problem that you're facing right now in your psychotherapy consultancy that you want to solve as soon as possible, and in fact as fast as possible, in terms of operations, in terms of marketing, in terms of technology, or whatever the aspect?
I'm struggling a little bit with an answer for that because with the software that I use and I market online, so I'm on, all of the social media platforms, I feel like that works pretty well for me. So I don't think I have an immediate problem that needs solving. I'm pretty comfortable with where my practice is at the moment.
Perfect. And
And definitely, and
how
probably know. Have you? I guess it goes back to my earlier question about have you heard about anything about it might not be in your practice specifically, but maybe any others that's out in the industry, or you might have heard some stories that people are using it in some way, shape, or form. Whether you jumped on it or not, but you might have read something out there, or maybe there's resources where people could actually look for these stuff.
I know that there are, but I don't know enough to speak intelligently about any of it. I've certainly heard it and seen it in trade publications as well as sort of layman things. So I know it exists and I know it's getting more and more prevalent and that there are more and more iterations at all different aspects of practice. But I don't know any more than that to be able to speak on it.
1000%. And I think that's normal from what we've always talk about and see, because it's such a new thing. It's like every day, even on our end, there's a new technology that changes. So it's just like, how are people even staying up to date with this thing if it's moving so fast, especially in a complicated industry like healthcare? And this is why I think like a podcast or a platform like this exists, is because we want to create these conversations. So then it then circles around like, hey, what are other people doing? How are you implementing it? What are some of we often hear about like the bottlenecks and the pros and cons, but what are the use cases that's happening? We want to put that in the forefront so people are, one, educated about it, but also we're able to share the resources about what's happening, because it's like we've kind of seen this cycle before in healthcare, whether it's AI or something else. Like I was just saying earlier about my when I first started, telehealth wasn't even a thing, and now it's the thing. So
Right.
it's like we've seen kind of something like this happen before, but I think now is the time where we need to say, okay, especially with it being AI and it being so um it's so easy for people to kind of just get so wrapped up into what it's doing and forget about the regulations and guardrails and things like that. And that's not what we want to see from AI, right? We want to be like, okay, if we're gonna do something or incorporate something, we want to make sure that it's it's gonna support someone who's in a client-facing role and somebody who's also at the top. At least that's what my mind goes a lot of the time, for sure.
Absolutely. And there, I do know other clinicians, and when the subject comes up, they're also concerned about the environmental cost of using AI and what that's going to do, but also who owns and runs the AI, who's funding it, who does it benefit on that other side. And I think that's also a factor in consideration ethically.
1000%.
Kid,
So yeah, my
you have done
I
a
guess
lot of consultations so far. What is your best consultation, or what is your best experience so far? Please share us with us.
Um, I'm not sure I understand the question. Like, what is the best? What do I like doing the best, or what
Yeah,
in
like
terms of my practice? What
yeah, exactly. Like you have done a lot of consultations during your practice. So share your best experience with us and with our audience as well.
I actually think that my best experience has been teaching grief at Fordham. For me, I love it so much, and I love educating people, and all the education, certainly with my students, makes people feel more seen and heard. And that's an amazing feeling. But also giving my students language to take out into wherever they practice. And most of them are not going to be grief therapists. A lot of them work with addiction, or they work in geriatrics, or they work with children in high schools and middle schools. And so being able to give other clinicians, new up and coming clinicians, a foundation and language to be able to help their clients feel less alone, feel like they're not crazy, and understand themselves a little better, that's my best experience.
Perfect.
amazing, amazing, amazing. So I guess I have two questions for you to wrap up everything, because this has been amazing. I think I got so much value from this conversation. So my first one will be, what are the channels where people can actually reach out to you, whether it's for your services or to, you might have said something that someone might want more clarity on, or actually want to ask you a question. What's the best way to connect with you about that, whether it's through content or email, LinkedIn? You just let us know where is the best place. And then what's one powerful message you would like to leave a listener with who might have joined in today, heard what we talked about, whether it's AI, whether it's grief, whether it's anything that we talked about. It could be as super broad as that. Just leave our listeners with a powerful one message or one liner if you got one.
Okay. The best way to find me is my social channels. So I'm Kat the Grief Therapist with underscores on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So anybody can contact me through there and see more grief content if they're looking for anything. Um, the message I would leave people with is, if you're new to grief and you feel completely overwhelmed, I want you to know that you are not crazy. Some of the things that grief brings is brain fog, confusion, sometimes even numbness, not being able to concentrate or focus on things, being really forgetful, being clumsy, being more susceptible to catching colds. All of those things are part and parcel of grief. And that's part of your body and your mind processing everything. So please give yourself grace with those things as you figure out how to carry your bag of grief rocks.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for being on this episode of the Digital Health Podcast. I hope everyone who's listening right now felt the powerful gems that we were just talking about. Reach out to Kat should you have any questions or need any resources. 100%. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It was such a pleasure. Thanks, you guys, for having me.